Hello and welcome to today's webinar series from Lean Focus. My name is Damon Baker. I'm the founder and CEO of Lean Focus, and I will be the moderator for today's presentation. The panelist who will be presenting our topic today is Ryan Lisiak, who is the Senior Vice President of the Lean practice inside of Lean Focus. And the topic we'll be covering today is building a sustainable problem-solving culture that lasts. Next. This presentation is the confidential property of Lean Focus. A recording will be made available to those that registered for this webinar. And if you were unable to listen to it in real time, there will be a link sent to you in your email roughly one day upon the conclusion of today's webinar that you can access this recording. In addition to that, at the end of today's presentation, I will direct you to a link on our leanfocus.com website that shows you where you can listen not only to this webinar, but past webinars that we've completed as well. Next. So all participants will be placed in listen-only mode, and there are PDFs available for download during this webinar. If you go to the control panel where it says handouts, 4 of 5, there is a handout relating to the topic that we'll be covering today, which is problem solving. And there's also a self-assessment that you can use in your organization around problem solving culture. And there are some materials that outline what Lean Focus does, an overview around our consulting practice, and an overview around our tools that are available for licensing inside your organization, one of which is problem solving. If you have any questions that you would like to ask upon the conclusion of today's webinar, I ask that you please put those into the question panel in your control panel, and I will be moderating the Q&A at the end of today's session, so we'll have enough time at the end. And as I mentioned, today's recording will be sent out to you in an email. Sometimes it gets hung up into organization spam folders, so if you do not receive it, you might want to check there and put us on the trusted senders list. Next. So it is my distinct honor to introduce you to Ryan Lisiak, who will be today's presenter, who will share a little bit about his background. Ryan?
Thanks, Damon. Yeah, Ryan Lisiak, been with Lean Focus for about 2.5 years, been around Lean for about 20 years. Started my career learning at Danaher, where I led the application of their business system to one of their operating companies, later applied Lean in the realm of supply chain and marketing, also led one of their business units, then left and went to Waste Management, where I was for 3 years, helping to apply Lean within the element of supply chain. Finally led 2 businesses in Connecticut, which is where I live, as Vice President General Manager. So very honored to be part of Lean Focus now for 2.5 years, working with numerous clients in numerous industries. See my background there of ones that I worked for, but my clients span industries, and that's one of the things I'll talk about is the breadth of Lean, and particularly within problem solving. So the agenda for today, first I'll start off by introducing Lean Focus a little bit, talk about what we offer. Then I'll talk about what is a problem solving culture, why we need a problem solving culture, how we grow and cultivate a problem solving culture, next steps, how we get started, and then we'll turn it over to you, as Damon said, for Q&A. So first, a little bit about Lean Focus, who we are. We're a team of strong individuals who are not lifelong consultants. We are not academics who cross every T and dot every I, but rather we are people that have learned and practiced Lean throughout our career. We've run departments, we've run businesses, we know what good looks like, we know what fake looks like. We've tried and failed and succeed and learned by doing. We now partner with organizations, and often it's just one person that goes into an engagement, instilling Lean principles and applying a suite of tools and processes. We help companies build high-performance cultures that enable them to stand on their own. Our mission is not to become a permanent crutch, but rather allow people to build on their own and solve their own problems. So Lean Focus is more than just about facilitating Lean events. Although Lean is a practice area that I'm honored to lead, I am passionate about Lean and problem solving. There are 7 other practice areas that help improve areas such as growth, innovation, procurement, and leadership. We also have a practice area dedicated to mergers, acquisitions, and integration that helps PE firms and strategic buyers achieve their EBITDA targets. Finally, we have a talent solutions group that can help place lean leaders both on a full-time and interim basis. You can also place executives that have lean backgrounds into the organization. I believe this breadth of lean separates lean focus from their peers in the industry. So lean, although it got started in automotive manufacturing, its principles apply equally across clients in various industries. What you see here is a listing of our subset of clients that we've helped early, mid, and late stages of their lean journey. Our approach is very diagnostic. It's far from a one-size-fits-all. So when we work with any client, we are not trying to fit them into a box of a previous client, but rather learning the nuances of their business and their industry and applying the concepts that I'm about to talk about. So the foundation for any good lean business system is a suite of tools that can be applied at the right time. This is our toolbox. Each of these boxes represent a tool that we can, I stress can, apply at the appropriate time. Lean Focus has, over the past 7 years, built this suite of tools that we employ ourselves on client engagements. So we eat our own dog food, if you will. The suite, though, can be licensed to a client as a whole or in part and customized based on their needs. This saves time, right? Preventing companies from having to reinvent the wheel and build these tools that we've already spent the time building. But it also helps avoid potential IP infringement issues from using potentially former clients' proprietary tools or trade secrets. What we're going to talk about today is in the middle that I've circled in red, problem solve. So it's in the foundational bundle. And as you'll see, problem solving is more than just a tool. Just like fixing a leaky faucet requires more than a good wrench, solving problems requires know-how, it requires great leaders, it requires continuous coaching others to build and sustain a good problem solving culture. So what is a problem solving culture? So start off first with some wise words from Albert Einstein. We need to think differently. We need to change the way in which we approach a problem, and we can't solve it with the same thinking that we used to create the problem in the first place. So in thinking about the culture, let's first contrast it with a traditional culture that I'll call a firefighting culture. In this, problems are dealt with individually or within departments, kind of siloed, often with a healthy amount of blame and finger pointing towards other areas of the organization. Solutions are based on opinions or intuition, often short-term solutions that only kick the can down the road. In contrast, on the right-hand side, a problem-solving culture involves a cross-functional team. So that's an important differentiator, that it's a diagnostic team of investigators who objectively assess the various causes of the problem. They seek out supporting facts or evidence to support their logic. They don't just rely upon intuition. They go to Gemba, which is a Japanese word for the real place, not sit in their office or conference room and guess what the problem may be. They develop both short as well as long-term countermeasures and create a plan of action with owners and dates to address the problem over time. Most companies, though, don't fall on either side, but rather somewhere in between on the spectrum between firefighting and problem-solving cultures. So I encourage you to first think about where you stand. That's often a good place to begin. So thinking about how to solve problems, it first helps to think about how they come to be. A good analogy is that of a weed, where a seed, which is a problem, starts off first small. We don't notice it until the leaves, which the symptoms start to emerge. So as any gardener would tell you, just simply cutting off the leaves of a weed won't help until you first seek out the roots, which in our analogy are the causes of the problem. Only understanding and addressing the roots of the weed, and likewise the problem, will prevent it from re-emerging over time. So what is problem solving? What I'm about to say is usually a 2 to 3 day, but I'll try to keep it into 2 to 3 slides in 20 to 30 minutes. But the first step is aligning on what is the problem. Sounds easy until we first gain a consensus. We're unable to quantify the problem. We won't be able to solve it. The adage of if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there applies very well for this first step. So you want to make sure that you have everybody on board with consensus that quantifies the problem. Then we get forensic. That team starts gathering data goes to Gemba, which again is the real place, gathers facts, gathers evidence to support their conclusion and support their logic. This team meets with various people within the organization to get them on board, get their feel for the problem, which will be critical later when we go to solve it. Then in the third step, we decide where we need to be. We set a target condition or a standard for where the problem should be, so we have a quantified gap that we're trying to close. Then we go and apply the plan, do, check out logic, which is what I'll talk about more on the subsequent slides. So plan, do, check, act, that's a process that I'll try to summarize here. Again, this is usually a long content, but I'll summarize it in just a few minutes here. The bulk of the time is spent in the plan phase. We estimate about 70% of the time should be spent diagnosing and understanding what the problem is, what has caused it, what are some of the myriad causes, then applying a process we call the 5 whys to help get to the root cause of the problem or causes of the problem. Then the rest of the time, the bulk of the 30% is spent on the do, check, act, which is coming up with countermeasures and try-storming them in Gemba to get some feedback. These countermeasures are both short and long-term in nature. Also critical within the latter phases is focusing on how that countermeasure will stick within the organization. So if we don't build it into the process and have that countermeasure be easy to implement, we don't spend the time to make it easy, the countermeasure will eventually over time wither away and die, and we'll be back at square one. So that's the importance of the last phase, is making sure that we've got the culture in place to sustain the countermeasure. So why do we need a problem-solving culture? So the first thing I want to talk about is that problem-solving culture builds alignment. So not that it describes anybody on the phone, but a traditional methodology is one where the symptoms of a problem are what gets treated. So my analogy before, cutting off the leaves of a weed. We don't typically in a traditional manufacturing methodology, you've got short-term thinking, you've got a firefighting culture, which is what I talked about before. You've got an environment where people settle for good enough. You know, adages of, oh, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's some of the words you'll hear from a traditional methodology. What this leads to is frustration over time for some of your high performance individuals because of the lack of alignment, because of the siloed nature. In contrast, the problem-solving methodology digs into the root cause of the problem. It involves a team effort that is supporting evidence that I talked about. It's very collaborative and very learning based, and it's very much based on long-term thinking. So it's not just about covering up the problem for today, but rather how do we contain, but then also solve the problem in the long term? How do we communicate that to the organization so it helps build trust and transparency? And it's one it's continuous improvement, so it's striving for better, not perfect, not settling for just good enough. Another benefit that I'll talk about is that problem solving builds a sustainable competitive advantage. So problem solving is at the heart of a good business system and works hand in hand with 2 other core tools, which are strategy deployment and daily management. First, strategy deployment creates new processes, new organizational muscle to achieve breakthrough results. Daily management is kind of the other side of that coin, which is more evolutionary. It helps organizations keep key metrics on track and operate as they intended. Problem solving, though, is essentially the glue that makes both of these tools work and sustain for the long term. So it's the wedge, if you will, that avoids backsliding and results in backsliding in performance. And so effective problem solving enables strategy deployment and daily management to get better year over year. So how do we grow a problem solving culture? First thing I want to point out is that have patience. This is going to take some time. This is not, culture is not easily built. It takes time. You know, Rome was not built in a day, and nor will your culture of problem solving. With many years of hard work, though, culture can be developed and cultivated, following some of the ideas I'm about to talk about. But you know, it's a set of beliefs, behaviors, and attitudes. And so keep in mind that it's very fragile. And so as you're building it, it can be easily knocked down if not properly maintained. Second point about growing a problem-solving culture is to change the mindset, right? So don't be looking for a quick fix. Keep in mind that you're going to have a constant evolutionary process. The Japanese word kaizen is a philosophy around continuous improvement, which means that everything can be improved and changed for the better. We're striving for better, not perfect. And we want to involve employees at every level. So it's not just a small team of people running around solving problems, but rather you're going to be looking to involve and engage your employees at every rank to properly get the facts and the data to solve the problem. And then the last thing is that it has no end. So you should not be looking at this as a means of solving a problem once and for all, but rather making the problem significantly better and then pivoting potentially to a different problem. You may have to address your problem again in the future, but that is part of the mindset of Kaizen, which says that there is no end, there is no perfect state that you're going to settle for. Third thing to talk about is to change the expectations. So in problem solving, you're gonna find some red. You're gonna find some things that are not where you want them to be, and you need to have where the reaction is to the culture is that the red is an opportunity. It's not a negative on any person or department, but rather just an opportunity for improvement. So you don't want to sweep the problem under the rug by labeling them as bad. Rather, you want to highlight, make them visual, make them visible, and have the team be tackling that red together. So it's an opportunity for the team to work, not a single out witch hunt that says that someone did their job incorrectly. Fourth thing I'll talk about is the coach. I happen to love to coach my boys' teams, baseball and basketball, and really approach problem-solving culture in that mindset. So you want to coach those that are less familiar, not preach at them, but rather you want to enable managers and individual contributors to solve problems on their own. So kind of inverting the traditional pyramid, if you will, where you've got folks that are elevating problems, but then leaders and managers are coaching along the way so that problems can be solved. Many of the small problems can be solved by individual contributors and managers. You obviously have involvement in all ranks for problems and visibility into those problems, but problem solving should not be just for those at the top. So what's your role? You know, how do you be a good coach for problem solving? Yes, you're going to advocate, you're going to encourage, you're going to teach, you're going to encourage the team to take action and let them have ownership, which is sometimes a difficult thing, but you want to make sure that you empower the team that you are coaching. You want to encourage them to try storm their ideas. So not just take one idea and go with it, but rather iterate, right? So put some extra coats of paint on solutions. And so you are trying and then trying to get some feedback from Gemba and then looking at how you can make it better. So you're learning from those mistakes, but you still want to stress the urgency, right? So you don't want that problem solving behavior to go on for too long. So you're both encouraging and advocating them to take ownership, but you're still driving the deadline. And then you're leading by example, right? You're not shortcutting the process. You're not creating a fear of failure culture. So you want to try to make sure that you're a positive role model for your team on encouraging them to spend the time on the planning and the doing, the checking and the act. So what do good coaches say, right? What are some of the things you say? First, you're very appreciative, right? So you're thanking and you're giving gratitude. You're also recognizing achievements. You're making sure that the blame doesn't go anywhere but you, right? You're not trying to blame any organization or any person, but rather it's the process. It's the things that we haven't done. And so you as a leader have a role in making them better. So if anybody is accepting of the blame, it should be you. You're also empowering and encouraging them by using words like I value your contribution, but you're also being inquisitive, right? You're making sure that they are asking the right questions. And so you're asking them about what they've learned. You're asking them about, you know, who have they spoken to? What types of things have they considered? What sort of feedback did they get from the floor associates? So you want to encourage that their problems, their solutions to the problems rather, are validated in Gemba, and so you're encouraging them and you're complimenting them along the way. So some common pitfalls to avoid. First is don't assume that this can just be delegated and given to a few other people. Leadership can sit this one out. You need to make sure roll up your sleeves and get involved with the team. But again, you're not necessarily diving into the trenches all the time. As I just talked about in the last slide, your role is as champion. You're encouraging, you're asking them what questions they've talked to, but you're getting involved. You're not sitting this one out. Second thing to avoid is to make the process too complex. Keep it simple. The easier, the better. You want to have a process of solving the problems, but getting into the third point, you want to have you don't want to just fill out a form. You may have a template that you use to guide this. We've got one, an A3 form, a template that we've designed, but we want to make sure that we're not taking away the human aspect of thinking, right? That people still need to solve problems around and think about them, not just fill out a form. Don't underestimate the resource requirements. This is definitely an effort that is not going to be short or take one or two people. So don't apply this PDCA logic to every problem, right? That's something that people also do, is they overstress their organization by doing too many A3s. So understanding that it's going to take a good amount of resources and time, you want to make sure that you are applying problem solving to the correct type of problems. Also, is you want to make sure that you're monitoring at the right frequency. So you're building into that cadence of daily management, building into monthly strategy deployment. And then you want to make sure that you're defining winning and losing in the gap in quantifiable terms, right? So subjective problems are very difficult to determine whether you have been successful. If you have a very quantified objective problem, then you are able to know how much of that you've been able to close, how much of that gap you've been able to close. And so you want to make sure that you are specifying and defining winning and losing in those quantifiable terms. So some best practices. First is you want to make sure that you've got an opportunity for your employees to learn and grow, right? So you want to cultivate that culture and not assume that we're just going to solve a problem once and then go back to our daily lives. You want to make sure that you are building in that culture for employees to develop, as well as take leadership. So you want to allow them to have employee-led value creation teams that leverage teamwork, leverage collaboration, and build that culture over time and have a virtuous circle. You want to have an employee-led suggestion and improvement process, right? So you solicit feedback and you gather ideas, both in general. So if they've got an idea in general, but also as part of your problem-solving process. So part of the going to Gemba is to solicit the feedback and ideas from the folks that live and breathe the problem. So you want to make sure that you are incorporating those into your process. You also want to tie this to performance achievement. So ideally have it where part of people's goals are based around safety, quality, delivery, cost, that encourages them to problem solve on their own to achieve their own objectives. Also, you want to make sure that you're developing leaders. So remember I talked about the importance of coaching. You want to make sure that you are at the same time cultivating the employees in your culture. You want to make sure you've got enough coaches to lead them along the way. So don't just rely upon one or two people to espouse the culture of problem solving and to potentially review and be a mentor. You want to also develop leaders to help within problem solving, and that helps build that high performance culture. And finally, you want to instill an expectation that this is going to evolve and there's going to be feedback and improvement over time, right? So you want to build that notion of Kaizen and continuous improvement and make sure that people understand that this is not just a one and done type of situation. All right, so where do we go from here? What are some of the possible next steps? So first is to assess your organization. And I created a nice little Venn diagram here to think about how do you do events today. Do you do a formalized problem-solving event? And if so, how? And what is your availability of coaches right now? What's it look like? What's your bench strength of people that can be mentors that not only know how to solve problems on their own and go down a potentially A3 problem-solving process, but are able to mentor others? That's extremely important within that to conduct events. And then finally, what tools do you have for folks to use? Do you have templates? Do you have educational resources for those people to use? Because really those three things coming together is what's going to build your culture. You can't just rely upon tools, right? If I want to fix my sink, I can't just go out and buy a bunch of new tools and expect that sink gets fixed. Conversely, I can't just hire someone to fix it, but not give him or her the proper tools, or expect him or her to have the proper tools in the events to do it. So you really have to think about the confluence of all three. What we encourage you to do is to do a self-assessment, and this is an example of our form. And this really gets back to, where does your organization sit on that spectrum that I talked about before between a firefighting culture and a problem-solving culture? So you want to make sure that you are assessing where the current state is today, so that you can properly fill in the necessary gaps based on how you approach problems and how your leaders are involved and how your coaches are involved, and what resources you have to solve the problem. Only through going through a nice self-reflective process will you then be able to identify where your areas for opportunity are and where you might need some help. So how can Lean Focus help? So on the events, we can facilitate problem-solving events. We can do workshops. We can do boot camps where we train leaders within your organization. So we can be a coach for hire. We can also do formalized sessions of training the trainer. So we can do a curriculum-based approach at problem solving, which involves both classroom learning as well as on the job learning. We can also, as I talked about before, within our talent solutions group, we can do a search to help with coaches. So we can do both executive placements, so folks that are going to be a president or vice president of the organization that have problem solving within their DNA, but also a lean leader search to help build out the continuous improvement organization for leaders that can help mentor problem solving. On the tool front, as I talked about before, we can license the Lean Focused Business System, again, either in totality or just the problem solving tool if you want. We also have a suite of embedded online tools, which are Microsoft Teams based, and we're building out those embedded online tools. So both of those together go with our tool offering. So what I encourage you to do is to, as a first step, if you haven't done one already, is to schedule a problem solving workshop. So go through, it's usually 2 or 3 days where individuals will be bringing live problems. So this is not a classroom setting where they're sitting back and enjoying the show, but rather they're working on live problems. They're working on mission critical problems that may have come from strategy deployment or daily management if you have it, or may have just come from your annual operating review, maybe an urgent problem from the floor. But you're doing this workshop and you're bringing the team there to both learn the concepts of Plan, Do, Check, Act, as well as lay the framework for solving that problem. So they're not going to leave on day 3 with that problem solved. That's obviously naive. But what they're going to leave with is a solid framework. They'll have started down the process of knowing what they don't know, what facts they need to gather, who they need to speak with. In the workshop, we actually go about building those initial steps and have them set up appointments and meetings and building the proper team. And so they know what they don't know and they build a framework. What I often encourage is to have a check-in about a month later with the team members that are doing a report out on their A3 at that time. So they're leaving with some things done, but a lot of things to do. And then you're doing a check-in, a few weeks later to assess their progress, coaching them along the way. So if you have those resources, great, you can coach them yourselves. But as I mentioned earlier, we can provide coaching sessions between the workshop and the report out as people are getting used to this. You know, like a lot of things, problem solving just takes a lot of practice. It's not something that you just hear about and then you do perfectly. And so the workshop is a great way to get that batting practice within those 3 days, as well as then iterate over time and then have that final report out where you're talking about what's the actions that people are going to do, who owns what by when. So I really encourage you to schedule a workshop if you haven't done one already. It's an excellent way to learn the process of Plan, Do, Check, Act, as well as start to lay the framework for your culture. As I mentioned, though, you do want to make sure that you are thinking about tools and coaches. So don't just stop at step one, but this is certainly a good first start. So wrapping up the content that I have, as I began with a quote, I'll end with a quote. Problem solving is all about humility. It's all about getting people's consensus and understanding and gathering facts. And so I think this quote about leading from walking behind is an excellent one to lead with. So with that, I'll turn it back to Damon to talk about other workshops as well as field some questions.
Thank you, Ryan. If you're interested in this webinar or upcoming webinars, you can go to our website. The address is at the top of this slide here. It's the Thought Leadership tab. And you can see all the past webinars that have been completed, that you can watch the videos at your own leisure, and you can also sign up for future webinars. And we do typically anywhere in the range of 2 to 3 per month. If you are on our mailing list, those will be sent to you automatically each webinar, and you can also click the sign up in that email directly and save yourself the task of going to the website and checking periodically. Next. So Ryan, as you were presenting, there's a lot of interest in this topic, so we have a lot of questions to get through. Are you ready?
I'm glad I went quickly.
Okay, so first question is, what tools or how would you suggest teaching root cause problem solving to floor level staff like operators and the like?
Yeah, so what I've seen work really well on the floor is that to build problem solving into what we call daily management. So build it into a cadence of understanding when there is a missed target condition, whether that be based on delivery, quality, delivery, cost, or safety, and then build problem solving into that daily management process, and have some slim down slides or slim down content that is available for them. So resources that are available for them to learn. But I do not encourage you to have a workshop for everybody or have enough workshops where everyone is trained deep on these concepts. Problem solving does not need to be always a formalized A3 deep dive, but rather one where associates on the floor can apply some rudimentary 5 why analysis to get the root cause and learn about countermeasures and ownership and how we go about solving.
Yeah, building off that answer, Ryan, we have a number of clients I'm thinking about, like Real Rexnord as an example, where in addition to daily management, as you described, we assign coaches to basically quality circle teams, the old term from the 1980s, where it's operator-led problem-solving initiatives linked to daily management, and we're providing the coaching of those front-level operator teams, and it's oftentimes done outside of normal working hours, or they're giving relief to these operators to work overtime or something like that on these topics. But you'll notice in both my answer and Ryan's answer, none of it is theoretical. It's all learned by doing. So so keep it simple. Less frameworks, less templates, less concepts. A good one is the tree concept, which Ryan flashed one of the slides earlier. I think that's a pretty simple mental model or framework that operators understand, and not only operators, all levels of leadership, frankly. So,
yeah.
Okay, you ready for the next question?
Yep.
All right, at what level should leadership be engaged in the organization's problem-solving culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends on the nature of the problem, but really, a leader or a senior leader, particularly, is really a champion for problem solving. So they're there as the audience for the solutions that the team comes up with. They're there as a coach and advocate. They're there to ensure that the team is on track and involving the right people, but they don't want to be too involved and shortcut the process. Be mindful of your role within the organization, that any idea or suggestion you give will all of a sudden become the best idea. And so you want to balance your involvement to be involved enough, but not too much as to stifle the creativity and the ideas from your team.
Yeah, it's a great answer. In our problem solving workshops, Ryan, you know that we use Managing to Learn as one of the pre-reads, the book Managing to Learn by John Shook. And I think that's just a great example to model as a leader. That your role as a leader is to create and mint problem solvers in the organization. So your job as a leader is to ensure that the process is being followed and that your people know how to use the process so that you can create this culture from the bottoms up. If you're stepping in and giving the answers and solutions as you just suggested, then you're not building that capability. And there's many parables on that, right? Teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime, and. So it's great. Next question here, kind of a play off the last one. So any recommendations on how to create a problem-solving culture from the bottom up?
From the bottom up, so that would be more, in my opinion, lean is it's not going to arise on its own. You're going to want to have people at all ranks are involved, and so you want to make sure to involve the people in the problem solving. So don't just have the workshop be all presidents, vice presidents, directors. So you want to have a diverse team from a diverse diversity of rank. Don't rely upon it being a bottoms up or a top down. So I maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but I don't believe that problem solving can be just delegated be bottoms up. But also conversely, don't have it be just where the leaders come out and with the solutions. That won't work either. You need to make sure that you're involving all aspects of the inverted pyramid that I showed there, and the leaders are coaching, and you're encouraging the folks to solve their own problems through training and coaching, which can be formalized. So we've got the workshop that could be a formal training that you send some associates through. You don't have to send them all through. And as we talked about on the previous question, there definitely can be problem solving as part of the daily life for associates on the board.
Yeah, I hear that question oftentimes when there's a struggle at the top to get leadership buy-in. So the person who asked the question, as an example, in similar situations that I've been in or seen, I've been frustrated by the lack of leadership involvement, but unwilling to give up. And so it's like, well, where do we start, right? So bottoms up can be a place to start. And what I know about leaders is if you drive a result and you impact the organization positively and you can do that consistently over time, they're going to want to start to know how the sausage is made. And now you can start to educate them on the PDCA process and everything you've been using in order to drive results to make them look good as leaders, right? So think of it as like earning your right to play. And I like to suggest that as an alternative to just sitting on your hands and going, when leaders lead, I will follow, because they're probably sitting at the top wishing you would do the same thing at the bottom. So don't let that stand in the way of getting started, I guess, is the moral of that story. Another question here comes from Michael. Does Lean Focus offer any Lean practitioner training or certification? You sort of hinted on that. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah. So absolutely. This is not meant to entirely throw away anything that you've already built or already have, right? So we have trained numerous continuous improvement organizations on a variety of things. Problem solving certainly is one of them. And so depending on their proficiency with Plan, Do, Check, Act, we may need a formalized train the trainer if they're less familiar, or maybe just one workshop, or maybe they are a coach as part of this process that, although we're facilitating, they're there and then lead the coaching of the teams during that period after the workshop, before the report out that I talked about, right? So in that month process, if you've got those resources, excellent, because they can be relied upon to coach and mentor the teams during that period. And so involving them in the workshop is a way for them to kind of fill in maybe some gaps of their understanding, but then also allow them to become familiar with what the problems are and who the players are and what areas they may need to have some help on. And so I would encourage you to include those types of individuals in a workshop so that they can serve that role of filling in the gaps of understanding for the team members.
Yeah, and within the context of problem solving certification, we have a rather extensive process that we go through for that. It takes the average person about 12 months to get through all the steps and activities needed to where we quote unquote call them certified. We've done that with a number of clients, and it's a great way to build self-sustaining capability inside the organization around problem solving. Otherwise, you're going to be reliant on us or others to come in and facilitate these workshops time and time again. So it's really important to build that capability. So Ryan, here's a question from Stephen. It says, what if leadership does not view problems as an opportunity? So really they have like a negative connotation. So, you know, the old manager where it's like, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. I don't want to hear about the problems. So what would you do in that instance?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because they obviously often control the purse, or always control the purse, and so it's certainly a battle you need to fight before problem solving, right? So you need to educate that leader on the difference between the way in which problems are addressed today and the way in which you recommend them to be addressed. So I talked about the firefighting versus the problem-solving culture, and how this could facilitate that process and allow the team to then bring solutions to them, right? So this is a vehicle, and we've got an A3 process that allows to build an action plan with how much of the gap you're going to close, who's going to own it. And that is exactly, in my opinion, what that leader wants to see. And so your approach could be to say that problem solving allows them to bring you solutions without just simply throwing ideas at the wall and hope they stick, right? So this will help break that cycle of dealing with the same problem over and over again, which I'm sure will resonate with that leader, because, you know, depending on how long he or she has been with the organization, they've probably seen the same problems reemerge 3 or 4 times, and so, or more, maybe more. So one possibility is to get that example of that quality issue, say, or delivery issue that is just repeated every year and never seems to go away. We just keep throwing band-aids at it, and so maybe use that example as a means of saying, look, I think we should try approaching this from a different lens and try getting down to the root cause of that, and try coming up with some short and long-term countermeasures. So that might be a way of kind of winning him or over, or at least allowing for that first step of a workshop and letting them gauge their interest therefrom. David, any other ideas?
I mean, it's really a mind shift change, isn't it, Ryan? Like a perspective change on behalf of the leaders.
Yeah. But it's tough to get that mindset change, right? That's why I was thinking initially that I think just the more concrete examples you can provide him or her will help your case.
Yeah, I think if you can, you know, just for lack of a better word, hijack whatever the strategic initiatives are that your leader is trying to drive in his or her organization, and demonstrate how this approach can enable them to be successful, you will earn that right to shift that mindset over time. All right. So by helping them accomplish their goals and objectives, whatever those happen to be. So I think too often people think of building a problem-solving culture as extracurricular to running the business and delivering whatever set objectives we need to focus on in this calendar year. Those two things need to work together. Like you enable those objectives by solving the problems that stand in the way of where you'd like to get this year. And I think that's one of the ways you can shift that mindset is say, hey, here's the forcing function that's going to help close the gaps on the things that we say are important to us. So they'll pull you versus push you away.
Agreed. Yeah.
So I've got a few more questions. So what if we already have continuous improvement leaders? We got a ton of them in our organization. What role do they play in building a problem-solving culture inside of the company?
Yeah, I think thinking back to that kind of Venn diagram, the circles there, they absolutely could be coaches for you, and depending on the proficiency they have in the PDCA A3 problem-solving process, may need some formalized training, as Damon talked about before, but could certainly be a good coach for teams that are going about doing problem solving on their own. And as I mentioned, it really requires tools as well as coaching to enable good problem solving. People aren't just going to go through this process on their own, off a blank sheet of paper and off of just ideas in their head. They're going to need some guidance. They're going to need some tools. And so I would encourage you to think about your CI team as potential coaches, and then building out any skill set therefrom. And so I would encourage you to involve them in the webinar that you kick off, and that way they can serve as the mentors for the teams that bring problems.
Great, thanks. Here's another one, and I'm sure you've probably heard this question before. We've tried a structured problem-solving process before and it didn't stick. Like we have our own methodology, so why isn't it working? Like why haven't we shifted the balance inside our organization?
Yeah, I think that you're right. That is a common one I hear, and often when you dig into the root cause of that problem, you find that it's due to a lack of leadership buy-in and lack of people beating the drum around problem solving, and a lack of sustainment. So sustainment falls apart with lack of leadership, but it also falls apart if you don't think about ahead of time how your countermeasure is going to be embedded into existing ways of thinking. So one of the things that I talk about in workshops that I lead is don't have your countermeasure be an and. Don't do everything you're doing today and your countermeasure. Have your countermeasure be an or. Do your countermeasure instead of things, so that way it becomes part of the process and it doesn't make someone's life harder. Everyone's got plenty of things to do already, and you don't need things to become even more complicated. So you need to think about, the teams need to think about their countermeasures, how they can embed them in the process, how they can use tools like Poke-Yoke, how can make it so the problem doesn't repeat, but then also encourage the leadership to buy into problem solving for the long term, so it doesn't just become the flavor of the month that we tried that once or twice, but it fell down. Well, it fell down because the leaders stopped believing that it was essential for them to prevent backsliding.
Yeah, it's very seldom, honestly, where I walk into an organization and I don't see some problem-solving methodologies in place, and those are at various degrees of maturity, obviously. But the common mistakes that I see are, the most common one is the problem-solving methodology exists almost like a book on a shelf that nobody looks at. And then the way the company is run is antithetical to what's taught in the classes that happen sporadically, if at all, right? So the failure mode there is the way of working inside of the company hasn't changed to align with problem solving as a way of how gaps get closed in the business, in every function, at every level, with all leaders. And you see it in the lack of problem-solving language that they're using. You see it in the lack of consistency of the lexicon amongst different departments when we talk about problems. You see it in how we jump to conclusions, how we firefight. And it's just from a lack of self-awareness, right? So when you're so knee-deep in this process and you can't step back from it to see all these mistakes that you're making to create this firefighting culture that Ryan referred to earlier, you sort of view this as like, well, this isn't really helping us, right? So those are just some of the common things that I see. So I don't know, Ryan, do you have any comments on that?
Great analogy to a book, and just don't let it get dusty, right? Make sure that it's used, because then it won't fall off someday. If you put it on the shelf, on the metaphorical shelf, it's eventually gonna fall down. And so it's something that is built up over time, but like a muscle, if it's not used, use it or lose it, it's gonna eventually wither away.
This question says, would you advocate for problem-solving report outs to be on a recurring agenda in executive team leadership meetings, given both problem-solving and problems can be solved with a top-level focus?
Yes, is the short answer. On the guise of use it or lose it. If it becomes an appendage of something else we're doing, the problem-solving meeting that maybe some people aren't going to go to, that's a lot less effective than if you build it into your existing process. So you do the or, not the and approach that I've talked about. So one common one that I've seen is strategy deployment. So a monthly strategy deployment meeting, where based on metrics and target conditions that you want to achieve, if you are red, there's an A3 that's written there that may, stress may, be reviewed in that meeting, but then usually some elements of A3 are reviewed. So maybe you've got 3 or 4 that are red, that have had A3s. Maybe choose to focus on 1 or 2 out of interest of time. But yes, I definitely would encourage you to embed this in your strategy deployment meetings, and embed this within your daily management meetings. And so make this part of your lexicon, as Damon said, make this as part of your daily habits and monthly habits that you already have within your organization.
Another question here, Ryan. It says, problem solving seems very long-term focused. What about the short term? We have problems that need to be fixed now, for instance.
No, it's both. So short-term and long-term countermeasures are encouraged, and in fact, there's places for them to be written. But if you cut your finger, you don't want to just go out and buy gloves that will prevent you from cutting your finger in the future. You definitely need to patch it over. So whether that be stitches or a Band-Aid. And the analogy applies here as well. You need to make sure you've got some containment measures, but you don't want to just rely upon containment, because guess what? You're gonna cut your finger again unless you solve that problem in the long term. So you do need a mix of both. So it's not just long-term focus, but I think one of the differentiators between problem solving and what people think of when they're solving problems is that long-term root cause nature of really understanding what's driving the problem, really getting down to doing the 5 whys and trying out your countermeasures, which yes is long-term and yes does take time. And so it is different in that regard, but it does not ignore the potential fires that you've got for today.
Yeah, I think most organizations, knowingly or unknowingly, are engaged in a game of whack-a-mole. You refer to as the firefighting culture. So they're solving, quote unquote, the technical root cause of why this problem occurred this instance, but they're not stepping back and looking at which processes in our business allowed these to happen in the first place and which things are most recurring to us. So if you think about launching a product as an example, a new product, and every time you launch products, it's got quality defects. So then the engineering team is working on solving each one of those technical defects, introducing the ECOs necessary to correct the material dimensions, whatever it has to be. And everybody's high-fiving each other because they've closed the gap. but nobody asked the critical question, like, why did our MVD process allow that to get through in the first place? Because people are already moving on to the next problem. Nobody goes back post-mortem and reflects on that process and then corrects the process, right? So we just keep re-engaging and firefighting year after year after year after year, and the madness never stops, right? So that's one of your roles as a leader, is just to point out the madness because we're so head down into it, we don't even recognize it ourselves. Any reaction to that, Ryan?
No, I think that's spot on. Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said, because unless you dig into that root cause and you question why it occurred in the first place, yeah, great, glad the blaze is away. If you just reward the firefighter and you don't reward the people that are preventing that problem from recurring, then guess what? You're gonna have that problem again.
Yeah.
Have that game of whack-a-mole you talked about. So yeah, I like that analogy as well.
I got one more question here. You talked about the importance of management in the process. Specifically, what does management need to be doing?
Yeah, management is the audience for this, right? So when you have a report out at the very end, hey, here's what we intend to do. Here's our action plan. Who owns what when? Is that audience? Management is the coach, or fosters the coach, right? If the management does not have the capabilities to coach this themselves, they can look to experts like us to fill that void. They can also start cultivating leaders within their organization that can be those coaches, right? So they can both start problem-solving workshops as well as start a train the trainer program to build those coaches within their organization. So management's role is ensuring that the beat goes on, right? That it doesn't just fall down. And ideally, they are filling some of the roles themselves and leading by example. But to the extent that they can't, then they can call on others for help.
Great. We've gotten through all the Q&A questions, my friend. Great job, as usual. Thank you for your leadership. For those of you that,
for attending.
Yeah, thanks. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, this presentation will be emailed to you in a recording, and it usually hits your inbox about 1 day upon the conclusion of the webinar. And if it does not come to your inbox, make sure to check your spam filter, just in case it went into your spam folder. So thanks again for your participation. Thank you, Ryan, for your leadership on this topic of problem solving, and we look forward to seeing all of you in our next webinar series. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day and week. Bye now.
Thank you.